I know we have a lot of good learning so far, and probably you are tired and exhausted a bit, but trust me, this next part is going to be worth the energy you give it, right? And I'd like to introduce two distinguished speakers at this moment. Reverend Sarah Appleyard. She is an ordained minister in the Reformed Church in America and currently serves as associate minister at the Hopewell Reformed Church in Hopewell Junction, New York, for Odyssey congregation. So Odyssey's mission is to provide a safe and welcoming place where people of all abilities can experience Christ's redeeming love. And Reverend Sarah has a lifetime of experience engaging with individuals with developmental disabilities and has a passion for disabilities advocate. And next speaker is my colleague, Reverend Laura Osborne. She serves as coordinator for ecumenical relations and disability concerns for the Reformed Church in America. So let's give a warm and enthusiastic welcome to these two speakers.
Hello. I know it's right after some long sessions, but I'm well caffeinated. Are you, Laura?
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
Let's do this.
Let's do it.
So I got to go visit Reverend Sarah this summer, and we had a good time. So you all need to go visit Reverend Sarah and have a good time too. But we're going to have a little good time here this afternoon. So I oversee disability concerns for the Reformed Church, and that lives in the center. And the center lives everywhere. We have a table in the back that has a whole pile of resources. I'll just get that straight out of the way. And there's a few handouts back there as well, so definitely take a visit. And there are resources there. There's just a handful of resources. If you need more resources, I can send you more resources. So there's some things going on back there. I also oversee ecumenical work for the RCA. I took Sarah's paper. So she doesn't have her notes because I took them, which is a great connection locally and globally. So we do all sorts of good fun stuff. So, Sarah, tell us a bit of your story, a bit about Hopewell and Odyssey, how that journey came about. We're here to hear about what you are up to.
So I'll start with myself. I grew up in the middle of Illinois with a mother who worked with adults who had developmental disabilities. And I grew up in a precarious situation because my mother was a live-in manager. And so in an apartment complex, we were the only typical family. Everybody else had disabilities of one sort or another. So this is something that literally I have known since I was a second grader. I've not remembered a time when I didn't know somebody with a disability. So, on my journey as a young adult, I never ever would have imagined that I would be doing what I'm doing, and here I am, because God is good, and because God has been preparing me for this for every single step of the way. So, Hopewell, 17 years ago, wanted to start a church. And in that time frame, they started at a park, right? So the early 2000s, they started to have a service at a local park. Now, nobody showed up. Ideally, right, young families. That's what they were wanting to attract. Nobody showed up. And then the next week, a group home of gentlemen with developmental disabilities showed up. Okay, let's roll with it. Another home showed up, another home showed up, and 17 years later, we are still worshiping. We have anywhere between 60 and 100 people given a Sunday. And that includes people with disabilities, people without disabilities, staff who are there, and whoever walks through our door. Prior to this position, I was actually kind of had two jobs. I was on a part-time contract with a congregation, and I was also doing case management for people in New York who have disabilities. So I've seen the flip side. I know the language. I know the New York laws, which help tremendously when you're walking alongside of a congregation with disabilities. So we kind of found each other through that way.
So she knows what she's talking about, is what she's really trying to tell you, is that she's got the background, the history, but what a beautiful ministry. The joy that was in that room was just infectious. Pastor Joanne Van Sant and I, if you don't know Pastor Joanne, she's a pastor in Ridgewood, New Jersey, also pastors a congregation of persons with disabilities. That is our only standalone congregation. This is our another congregation, so just a beautiful space of joy and excitement. So local mission, which is what we're hanging out with, right? When I started at the RCA 6 years ago, I was on the local mission team. I was hired to do interreligious work, but within that team, we kept asking ourselves, what is local mission, right? We knew it. We had books on it. We were writing about it. But we kept looking at our churches and the neighborhoods, and it goes just right back to Scripture. Who is our neighbor? Do we love our neighbor? Do we even know our neighbor? Yes, we're called to love our neighbor, but do we know our neighbor? Someone said earlier, who's in your backyard? And I joked, my cows, and she said, my chickens. But who's actually in our backyard? I grew up in the country, so I had to know my neighbors, because you had to rely on your neighbors for this, that, or another thing, and I've carried that with me my whole life. I know my neighbors. I have to know my neighbors, because that is what I grew up knowing, and Scripture tells me I need to know my neighbors. So when we look at our churches, look at your neighborhoods, your city blocks. One of my pastors is here, and he constantly is looking at our neighborhood. We are a church right in the neighborhood, and a few of our neighbors come to our church, and so he's constantly looking at the neighborhood and how are we serving these neighbors. So this is another way of looking at our neighborhoods. And in our neighborhoods, there are group homes. We don't often see them. I know there's group homes in my neighborhood because I see the vans and I know the agencies that are around. So next question. So if I'm a local church pastor and I find out there's some group homes in my neighborhood and I kind of see the agency vans maybe, how do I as a church, how do we as a church go about inviting them, our neighbors, into our spaces?
So that is a tricky one, but also a good question. So here's the thing. I want you to think for just a second. Where you live, do you know where there is a group home in your community? I see a lot of yes. Okay. If you don't know, I want to challenge you when you go home to find out. Because I guarantee you in your communities, there are several agencies. So what is an agency? You may not. I'm going to back up for a second because this is something I'm learning. I know a language that most people don't know. The language of disability, okay? Because let's be honest, I could say lots of words that you're going to have no idea about, right? Like, do you know the difference between Medicaid and Medicare and what it's really doing? Do you know what it means for somebody to have a high level of support versus a low level of support? You may and that's just the beginning. Like, there's a whole structure underneath, okay? But the first thing is to identify and to know that they're there. The second thing is also to know and identify that there are already people in your congregation with disabilities. You may not know, but they're there. Or people in your congregation with children or grandchildren with disabilities. So something is to also be open, welcome, and ready for them before they come, okay? Thing number one, churches do not have to be ADA accessible. I found myself in June of 2020 being diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis at the age of 37. Suddenly, the churches that I was going to for classis meetings, for meetings with my colleagues, were no longer accessible to me because my mobility is not always good. Think about that for a second. A place that was just welcoming to me a couple years ago isn't always now. So thing number one, think about your accessibility. and think about the unspoken rules that happen in a sanctuary, right? At Odyssey, we don't meet in Hopewell Sanctuary. We actually meet at a different site. We meet at one of our local agencies' Dehabilitation Center. For those who may not know, that is a center that teaches, think of a program where people who have intellectual disabilities go during the day to continue their life skill learning. That's the kind of place this is. So it's already accessible. We already have every accessibility covered because we're using a space that is made to be accessible. But also know that if somebody with a disability comes into your space, they may not know the rules and they may not care. A couple weeks ago, I had this beautiful young woman in worship with her group home, and she was having a difficult morning. Who here has ever had a difficult Sunday morning? If you're not raising your hand, please put it up because you're not being honest. Thank you. Right? It's hard. We all have hard moments, but most of us know how to self-regulate ourselves, right? She doesn't. So she was screaming in the back of the worship space. Now, staff and leadership were working with her. Did I stop the service? Absolutely not. I kept going. We kept preaching. We kept praising God. Because in that moment, that's what we needed to keep doing, right? It wasn't about that chaos that was happening, because at Odyssey, there's chaos every single Sunday. And if we stopped a worship service for the chaos that was happening, we would never worship. But be ready and be open to what you're going to learn and experience. And the other key thing to know, too, is often there are staff who come with these people with disabilities, right? Those staff are often immigrants, at least in New York. They're often people who've left their own family to go care for other people and aren't getting to worship in their own sanctuary, maybe. Or maybe they're from a completely different faith tradition. So be welcoming to them as well. Okay, so it's not just about people with disabilities, it's also about their caregivers as well. Because what I have found is they are just as in need of the gospel as the rest of us, if not sometimes more. Because they're pouring themselves out daily for those individuals they're taking care of. And also, don't be afraid of asking questions, but also be aware that some questions you may not be able to have the answer to, right? As church members, we like to get to know people, and we like to ask lots of questions. Sometimes, especially with those in kind of a sensitive population, who knows what HIPAA is, right? We cannot share health information with other people, right? So you can't come up to a staff member and say, "Oh, what's Johnny diagnosed with?" Right? I've seen it happen. I know we're laughing, but I have seen it happen. Right? And also, don't assume that you know what their needs are. Do not assume anything, because I can tell you, I look out over my congregation, and some of them have no needs in that moment. And some of them have all of the need in the moment, right? And some of them may not look like they can communicate with me, but they can. And some of them may not be able to communicate with me the way I'm used to. So those are just a couple snippets. But be open. Be open.
That's huge, right? Be open. If we kind of click through the next couple of slides, we've got just Odyssey's safe space and worship services and what that looks like. We talk in disability concerns about universal design versus reactionary design. So many of our churches were built many years ago, right, where there's lots of stairs and many levels and all sorts of cool looking things, but hard to traverse, right? So there's lots of changes that we need to make, which all well and good, and we're working towards those changes. There's many spaces that are being built with this universal design, where it's the one level, think that we don't need to build a ramp later because it's accessible now, those pieces. And there's articles and things written that we have access to on our Breaking Barriers and different, the new Breaking Barriers coming on Thursday has worship resources in there about universal design. If you don't have access to that, my card's in the back and I can hook you up. So we have an accessibility survey that the CRC and the RCA put together. It's pretty comprehensive. It doesn't just look at your church building. It looks at the worship service as well. It looks at classrooms and all these different pieces of how accessible is the church, the everything. So we talk about the physical buildings, but we also can think through invisible disabilities as well. So this is kind of our next conversation piece. We have invisible disabilities in the church. What are those?
So disabilities is a big, wide word, right? And there are so many disabilities that could be listed. I could teach you an entire semester class on the different kinds of disabilities. So what we call invisible disabilities are things that you cannot see, okay? So for instance, me on a good day, you can't tell that I have a physical disability, right? Because I'm walking around, running around like everybody else. But I have a handicap placard in my car. I have these things built in that people may not know or understand. And you heard when I said there are people in your congregation with disabilities. Most of the time, those are the invisible ones. Now, I want to talk about the autism spectrum, because what we're learning more and more about the autism spectrum is that it is way bigger than we could ever imagine, right? And many people are on it. Some of us are on it, right? And the interesting thing is that that can be invisible too. People who need high amounts of support, so people who often you'll see in group homes later in their lives, or are in maybe that contained class in school when they need a lot of support, okay, you can see that disability, right? But what about those kids or those adults who you can't see, but inside up here is not typical, right? Inside up here, while you're sitting there preaching, is organizing their pantry or doing a calculus problem, right? Or wondering why you're still talking and you've said the same thing 13 times now, right? Or they need to move. So that hospitality piece of being ready, having space in the back of your sanctuary where people can stand, they can wiggle. I always sit in the back because I'm a wiggler. I have to move around. I love that there are standing tables here because while I can't use them anymore, they're needed, right? These are things that we just do for ourselves because we know those needs. But if somebody has a disability that you may not be able to see, and not the coping skills to do some of those things, you're going to see them manifest differently. And that's when we often, especially with kids, is when we start to label it as bad behavior, right? Because here's the thing from the disability world that I have learned for the past couple decades, and I have to remind myself daily. Behavior is behavior, right? There's good behavior and bad behavior. So we don't want to say, oh, you know Sally, she has a behavior every Sunday when she's in worship. She's just having she's such bad behavior. No. Maybe something's going on with Sally, that there's a need that's not met, that maybe she doesn't like to sit in the pew because it feels funny, right? Maybe she doesn't like to listen for 30 minutes because she could only listen for 5. But when you look at Sally, she looks just like everybody else in the pew. And Sally has shame because that's what she's been taught by the church, right? That she has to sit in that pew and she has to be there for that whole hour service. Don't you move. Our churches have done that to people for a very long time, right? We have forced people who think differently than ourselves, who have these invisible disabilities, to fit that mold. When God designed them to be, my favorite word that I've heard many times today is messy, right? God designed every single one of us to be messy, and yet here we are preaching for 30 minutes and expecting people to sit still, right? So those kinds of things and learning. And when we start to know our congregations, right, we learn those things about them. And when we start to educate ourselves about disabilities, we may be able to look out over our congregations and say, okay, I see that. But my warning label is also this: we can't label people and expect them to fit in those boxes, right? Because you could have two people on that autism spectrum or two people who have Down syndrome who have incredibly different needs, right? So you can't say, oh, they have autism. They must do this, 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 and this. And then you meet them and you're like, wait a second, what? When really you need to get to know them first before their disability.
And then you find their gifts are X, Y, and Z.
Yep.
There's a book in the back, Everybody Belongs, Serving Together, and that's what we're aiming, right? Is how are we all in the church serving together? The website on the screen is our 8 kind of priority areas that we work in within disability concerns. I think the next slide is that QR code, I believe. It's not. It was before. Anyway, there's a flyer on the back that has the QR code. There is a local ministry that connects churches to their neighbors. It's called King's Table. Every life has value and purpose. This is a friend of ours, and they work with schools, group homes, local churches, linking volunteers in the community to assist them in becoming a welcoming place for people with all abilities. So this is a local ministry doing just what Reverend Sarah is talking about. In many ways, we also are, we're not doing that connection piece. We're helping equip churches. Equip is the name of our game in discipleship. But all of these pieces together is just trying, right? Our churches are spaces that we want to be that hospitable space. So all of these, we talk a lot about hospitality in the RCA and that equitable piece, and how can we all be in the church and learning and loving together. And if I need to be on a wiggle stool in the back, then that's what we need, right? Or have that sensory room, or whichever piece it is. So, great. Any last words of wisdom?
I just want to encourage you all. I'm going to share a quick story. Do I have time? Fantastic. So for the month of September, Odyssey has been doing a move-a-thon to raise money, because while we are a ministry of Hopewell Reformed Church, we also are a congregation that cannot be self-sustaining. All of our people are on Medicare, right? That's Medicare and Medicaid. So there isn't, tithing, it looks differently at Odyssey, and it is beautiful. So I want to share with you, I'm not going to use her name because I didn't ask her permission, but I know I can share the story. A young woman came to Odyssey shortly after it started, and she was a very angry person, right? Life did not deal things well to her. She had had a very difficult life. I'd have been angry too, honestly. And so she came to Odyssey, and she was curious about it, tiptoe her foot in it. And she does have intellectual disabilities, but she'd also been hurt by the church because of that. And then she found herself with breast cancer. And the way her Odyssey community came around her, supported her, and brought her through that, this is now somebody, every event that we have, I get a note from her afterward encouraging me. She was just at a local community day raising money for the move-a-thon, approaching every person there, to the point where she didn't even realize she had went up to one of the House representatives. And he gave her money because she shared with him the passion and how Odyssey had changed her life and took her out of being a really negative person to being somebody and a child who felt worthy of God's love. Because the other piece I'm going to leave you with is, don't ever do this work without dignity of the person. Because I'll tell you, my Odyssey friends teach me and have taught me more about God than I think I teach them. And that has made me so incredibly grateful. It is an honor to be their pastor. It is an honor to walk into a day hab and hear, Reverend Sarah, and cause a little bit of a ruckus, so I don't go often. But it is with joy that I serve in this capacity. And my hope and my wish for every church is that I don't have to exist at Odyssey. Because truthfully, all of my congregants should be in local churches. But the truth is, many churches have hurt them before, and that sometimes they can't even get in. So I encourage you to do that work.
So we equip and we keep moving forward. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.